The grandfather clock in the Talbot mansion's library chimed 3 times as Vicky Johnson Talbot slipped the final document back into her husband's private safe. March 15, 2025. 3 years, 10 months, and 1 day since she'd become Mrs. Marc Talbot. 3 years, 10 months, and 1 day of playing the perfect Charleston socialite wife while planning the systematic destruction of the family that had killed her father. At 34, Vicky had perfected the art of deception. Her natural hair was styled in the elegant waves that Charleston society expected, her honey-toned skin glowed with the kind of health that came from spa treatments and personal trainers, and her smile could charm donations from the stingiest old-money families at charity galas. But beneath the designer dresses and pearl earrings, she was still the same woman who'd watched her father's construction crew pull his broken body from the rubble of the Riverside Commons project 6 years ago. The safe clicked shut with a sound that seemed to echo through her soul. Inside her Hermes clutch, the USB drive felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. After 3 years of careful searching, she finally had it, the evidence that would destroy Talbot construction and development forever. But as she turned to leave Marc's study, her eyes fell on their wedding photo displayed prominently on his mahogany desk. The image showed her in her grandmother's restored lace gown, Marc in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, both of them laughing at something his best man had whispered during the ceremony at St. Philip's Church. They looked happy. Genuinely, radiantly happy. The problem was, she hadn't been acting in that moment. Mrs. Talbot? The voice made her jump. Constance, their housekeeper, stood in the doorway with a concerned expression. Mr. Marc called. He's running late from the office but wanted me to remind you about dinner with his mama tonight. Vicky's stomach clenched. Eleanor Talbot, the steel magnolia matriarch of Charleston's most prominent family, who'd somehow managed to accept her son's marriage to a working-class girl with surprising grace. The woman who'd spent 3 years treating Vicky like the daughter she'd never had, teaching her the intricate social codes of Charleston society, sharing family stories over sweet tea on the veranda. The woman whose husband had murdered Vicky's father and covered it up. Of course, Vicky managed, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. Tell her I'm looking forward to it. Constance smiled and disappeared back down the hallway, leaving Vicky alone with the weight of what she'd discovered. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to the photos she'd taken of the documents. Bank records showing payments to building inspectors. Email chains discussing acceptable risk levels for worker safety. And the final, damning piece, a handwritten note from Marc's father, Robert Talbot, dated 3 days before the Riverside Commons collapse. Johnson's crew is asking too many questions about the foundation specs. Handle it. Her father, David Johnson, had been the foreman who'd raised concerns about the building's structural integrity. He'd filed 3 separate reports about corner cutting and safety violations. 3 reports that had been buried, ignored, dismissed. 3 reports that had cost him his life when the building came down during the final inspection. Vicky sank into Marc's leather chair, the same chair where he sat every morning reading the Charleston Post and Courier while drinking his coffee black, the same chair where he'd proposed to her on Christmas morning 2021, getting down on one knee with his grandmother's ring and tears in his eyes. The ring that now felt like a shackle on her finger. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother Isaiah. Any luck with the files? The anniversary is coming up. Dad deserves justice. Isaiah Johnson was a detective with the Charleston Police Department, one of the few black officers who'd managed to climb the ranks despite the department's complicated history. He'd been the one to suggest that Vicky infiltrate Charleston society, use her event planning skills to get close to the families that controlled the city's construction industry. He'd been the one to help her research Marc Talbot, to identify him as the perfect target, young, idealistic, recently heartbroken, and heir to the empire they needed to destroy. What Isaiah didn't know was that somewhere along the way, Vicky had stopped pretending to love her husband. She typed back, "Got everything we need. But Isaiah, it's complicated." Complicated how? "We've been planning this for 6 years, Vicky. Don't tell me you're getting cold feet now." Before she could respond, she heard the front door open and Marc's voice calling out, "Vicky? I'm home." Her heart did that stupid flutter it had been doing for the past year whenever she heard his voice. Marc Talbot, at 36, was everything Charleston society had bred him to be: tall, handsome, with the kind of easy charm that came from generations of privilege. But he was also kind in ways that surprised her, generous with his wealth in ways that went beyond tax write-offs, and passionate about using his family's company to build affordable housing for the communities that had been displaced by gentrification. The same company that had killed her father. "In the study," she called back, quickly shoving her phone into her purse and arranging her face into the loving smile she'd perfected. Marc appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and his dark hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it, a habit he had when he was stressed. "Sorry I'm late." The Riverside Commons Memorial Project is hitting some snags with the City Planning Committee. Vicky's blood turned to ice. The Riverside Commons Memorial Project. Marc's personal initiative to build a community center on the site where her father had died, complete with a memorial garden honoring the workers who'd lost their lives. He'd been working on it for 2 years, pouring his own money into the project, fighting red tape and neighborhood opposition. "What kind of snags?" she asked, proud of how normal her voice sounded. Marc moved to his desk, picking up their wedding photo and smiling at it before setting it back down. "Some of the families are asking questions about the original building collapse. They want a full investigation before they'll approve the memorial." He looked up at her, his green eyes troubled. "I keep telling them we've been transparent about everything, but I'm starting to wonder if there's something about that project that I don't know. Something my father never told me." Marc sat on the edge of his desk, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same scent that had been driving her crazy for 3 years. "Vicky, what would you do if you found out your family had done something terrible? Something that hurt innocent people?" The question hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at this man who'd somehow managed to ask the exact question that was tearing her apart. She started, then stopped. What could she say? That she'd married him specifically because his family had done something terrible? That she'd spent 3 years lying to him, manipulating him, planning his destruction? That she'd fallen in love with him despite herself, and now she didn't know who she was anymore? "I think," she said carefully, "that sometimes we have to choose between loyalty to our family and loyalty to what's right." Marc studied her face with an intensity that made her wonder if he could see through her carefully constructed facade. "And if those two things are mutually exclusive? Then we have to decide what we can live with." He was quiet for a long moment, then reached out and took her hand. "I love you, Vicky. Whatever happens with this memorial project, whatever comes out about the past, I want you to know that. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." The words should have felt like victory. For 3 years, she'd worked to make him fall in love with her, to make him trust her completely. His love was supposed to be a weapon she could use against him. Instead, it felt like a knife twisting in her chest. "I love you too," she whispered, and realized with horror that it was true. Marc leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of the kind of tenderness that had been slowly breaking down her defenses for months. When he pulled away, his eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. "We should get ready for dinner with Mama," he said. "She's been looking forward to this all week." Vicky nodded, not trusting her voice. As Marc headed upstairs to change, she remained in the study, staring at the safe that held the rest of the evidence she'd been collecting. Evidence that would prove Marc's father had not only caused her father's death but had actively covered it up. Evidence that would destroy the Talbot family's reputation, their business, their legacy. Evidence that would destroy the man she loved. Her phone buzzed again. "Isaiah, Vicky, the families of the other victims are getting restless. They deserve to know the truth. Dad deserves justice. Don't let them charm you into forgetting why we're doing this." She stared at the message, then at the wedding photo on Marc's desk, then at the safe that contained enough evidence to bring down an empire. Outside the study windows, Charleston's historic district stretched toward the harbor, all cobblestone streets and antebellum mansions, Spanish moss and hidden secrets. The city had built its fortune on the backs of enslaved people, had spent centuries perfecting the art of beautiful facades hiding ugly truths. Just like she had. Just like the Talbots had. The grandfather clock chimed again, marking another hour in a marriage built on lies. In 3 hours, she'd sit at Eleanor Talbot's dining room table, eating shrimp and grits while making polite conversation about charity galas and garden parties. She'd smile and laugh and play the role of the devoted daughter-in-law, all while carrying evidence that could destroy the woman who'd become like a mother to her. And tonight, when she and Marc returned home, she'd have to decide, justice for her father, or love for her husband. Some choices, Vicky was beginning to realize, didn't have right answers. Only consequences she'd have to live with forever. 2 hours later, Vicky stood before the mirror in their master bedroom, fastening the pearl necklace Marc had given her for their 2nd anniversary. The woman staring back at her looked every inch the Charleston socialite, elegant navy dress that skimmed her knees, hair swept into a sophisticated chignon, makeup flawless despite the storm raging inside her chest. "You look beautiful," Marc said from behind her, his reflection appearing in the mirror as he adjusted his tie. At 36, he still took her breath away, tall and lean in his perfectly tailored suit, dark hair combed back, green eyes warm with the kind of affection that had been slowly destroying her carefully constructed walls for months. "Thank you," she managed, turning to face him. "Ready to face your mama's interrogation about why we haven't given her grandchildren yet?" Marc laughed, the sound rich and genuine. She's been dropping hints about converting the guest room into a nursery. I told her we're still enjoying being newlyweds. Newlyweds. After 3 years of marriage. The irony wasn't lost on Vicky that she was still discovering new things about her husband, like the way he hummed old jazz standards while shaving, or how he left little notes in her coffee mug when he had early meetings. Small intimacies that made her deception feel more monstrous with each passing day. The drive to Eleanor Talbot's mansion on South Battery took them through the heart of Charleston's historic district. Rainbow rose pastel houses glowed in the evening light, tourists strolled along the cobblestone streets, and horse-drawn carriages clip-clopped past antebellum mansions that had witnessed centuries of secrets. "Penny for your thoughts," Marc said, glancing at her as they stopped at a red light near the French Market. Vicky forced a smile. "Just thinking about the memorial project. Have you considered that maybe some stones are better left unturned?" Marc's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You think I should drop it?" "I think." Vicky chose her words carefully, that sometimes the past is complicated. And sometimes seeking the truth hurts more people than it helps. Even if that truth could prevent future tragedies? The question hung between them as they pulled into Eleanor's circular driveway. The Talbot family estate was a masterpiece of antebellum architecture, white columns, wraparound porches, and gardens that had been featured in Southern Living magazine 3 times. It was also the house where Marc had grown up, where his father had planned the cover-up that killed her father, where family secrets had been buried as carefully as bodies in Magnolia Cemetery. Eleanor Talbot met them at the front door, resplendent in a silk blouse and pearls that probably cost more than most people's cars. At 62, she was still a striking woman, silver hair perfectly coiffed, posture that spoke of decades of cotillion training, and the kind of smile that could charm or cut depending on her mood. "Vicky, darling." Eleanor embraced her warmly, and Vicky felt the familiar stab of guilt. "You look absolutely radiant." "Doesn't she, Marc?" "Always," Marc said, kissing his mother's cheek. "Something smells incredible. Constance made your favorite, shrimp and grits with andouille sausage. And I may have asked her to prepare her famous she crab soup." Eleanor linked arms with Vicky as they walked toward the dining room. "I know how much you love it, dear." The dining room was a shrine to Talbot family history, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, a mahogany table that had hosted Charleston's elite for generations, and china that had somehow survived the Civil War. As they settled into their seats, Vicky couldn't help but notice the empty chair at the head of the table where Robert Talbot used to sit before his heart attack 2 years ago. The man who'd ordered her father's death was gone, but his legacy lived on in every brick of the Talbot empire. "So," Eleanor said as Constance served the soup, "tell me about this memorial project, Marc. I've been hearing whispers at the garden club." Marc's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "What kind of whispers?" "Oh, you know how these old biddies talk. Something about families asking questions, wanting investigations." Eleanor's tone was light, but Vicky caught the steel underneath. "I do hope you're not planning to drag the family name through unnecessary drama." "Mama, if there's something about that building collapse that we don't know." "There's nothing to know," Eleanor said firmly. "Your father was a good man who built this company with integrity. The Riverside Commons collapse was a tragedy, but it was an accident. Sometimes buildings fail. Sometimes people die. That's not our fault." Vicky's soup spoon clattered against her bowl. Both Marc and Eleanor looked at her with concern. "Sorry," she said quickly. It's hard to think about people dying in accidents that might have been prevented." Eleanor's eyes sharpened slightly. "Of course, dear. I didn't mean to sound callous. It's just that your father-in-law carried enough guilt about that project. He blamed himself until the day he died, even though the investigation cleared our company of any wrongdoing. The investigation that had been bought and paid for. Vicky knew because she had the receipts, literally. Bank transfers to the lead investigator, payments to city officials, a paper trail of corruption that led straight back to Robert Talbot's personal accounts. "What kind of guilt?" Marc asked quietly. Eleanor set down her spoon, her composure slipping for just a moment. He felt responsible for every worker who got hurt on our job sites. Even when it wasn't our fault. Even when they were the ones who cut corners or ignored safety protocols. The workers cut corners? Vicky's voice came out sharper than she intended. "I thought the investigation showed it was a structural failure." "Well, yes, but..." Eleanor looked flustered. "I mean, there were questions about whether the crew had followed proper procedures. Your father-in-law always said that David Johnson, the foreman, had been asking a lot of questions about the foundation work. Robert thought maybe he'd discovered something the crew was trying to hide." Vicky's vision blurred. Her father hadn't been cutting corners, he'd been trying to expose them. He died because he'd been doing his job too well, asking too many questions, refusing to look the other way when safety was compromised. "Vicky?" Marc's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you all right? You look pale. I'm fine, she lied, reaching for her water glass with a hand that trembled slightly. Just, the soup is a little rich. Eleanor was studying her with the kind of sharp intelligence that had made her the queen of Charleston society for 4 decades. You know, dear, you've seemed a bit off lately. Are you sure you're not coming down with something? Or perhaps. Her eyes lit up with hope. Perhaps there's some news you'd like to share? Mama, Marc warned, but his own eyes held a flicker of the same hope. I'm not pregnant, Vicky said quickly. The lie came easily. She'd been taking birth control religiously for 3 years, unable to bear the thought of bringing a child into her web of deception. Eleanor's face fell slightly. Well, there's no rush, of course. Though I do hope you'll consider it soon. The Talbot name needs to continue, and you'd make such beautiful babies. Beautiful babies who would carry the blood of both victim and killer. The thought made Vicky's stomach churn. Actually, Marc said, reaching for Vicky's hand, we've been talking about it more seriously lately. Haven't we, sweetheart? The endearment, combined with the warmth in his voice, nearly broke her. Yes, she whispered. We have. It wasn't entirely a lie. Marc had been bringing up children more frequently, talking about converting the guest room, mentioning how much he'd loved growing up in Charleston and wanting to give their future children the same experience. Each conversation had felt like another nail in the coffin of her revenge plan. How could she destroy the father of her hypothetical children? How could she tear apart the family she'd somehow become part of? Wonderful. Eleanor clapped her hands together. Oh, Vicky, you have no idea how happy this makes me. After losing Robert, the thought of new life in this family. She dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. I'm sorry. I don't mean to get emotional. It's okay, Mama, Marc said gently. We all miss him. He would have loved you so much, Vicky, Eleanor continued. He always said Marc needed someone strong, someone who could challenge him. Someone who wasn't just another Charleston debutante looking for a rich husband. The irony was suffocating. Robert Talbot would have hated her if he'd known who she really was. The daughter of the man whose questions had threatened his empire. The woman who'd married his son specifically to destroy everything he'd built. Tell me about him, Vicky heard herself say. About Robert. Marc doesn't talk about his father much. Eleanor's face softened. Oh, he was complicated. Brilliant, driven, sometimes ruthless in business. But he loved his family fiercely. Everything he did was to protect us, to build something lasting for future generations. Even when it hurt other people? The question slipped out before Vicky could stop it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Eleanor's smile became razor-sharp. I'm not sure what you mean, dear. In business, sometimes protecting your family means making hard choices. Choices that might hurt other families. Marc was staring at her now, confusion and concern warring in his expression. Vicky, what are you getting at? She was walking a tightrope over an abyss, but she couldn't seem to stop herself. I'm just wondering if your father ever talked about the families affected by the Riverside Commons collapse. If he ever expressed regret. Eleanor set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. My husband expressed appropriate sympathy for the victims and their families. He also made substantial donations to help with funeral costs and medical expenses. But he refused to accept blame for an accident that wasn't his fault. What if it wasn't an accident? The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Marc's face had gone white, and Eleanor looked like she'd been slapped. Vicky, Marc said carefully, what are you saying? She was saying too much. Revealing too much. But 6 years of buried rage was clawing its way to the surface, and she couldn't seem to push it back down. I'm saying that sometimes accidents aren't accidents. Sometimes people die because other people make choices that put profit over safety. Sometimes. That's enough. Eleanor's voice cut through the room like a blade. I don't know what's gotten into you, Vicky, but I won't sit here and listen to you slander my dead husband. Mama, please, Marc started, but Eleanor held up a hand. No, Marc. Your wife seems to have some very specific ideas about your father's business practices. I'd like to know where those ideas are coming from. Vicky met Eleanor's steely gaze and saw something that made her blood run cold. Not just anger or offense, but recognition. As if Eleanor knew exactly who she was and what she was doing here. I think, Eleanor said quietly, it's time we had an honest conversation about why you really married my son, Miss Johnson. The use of her maiden name hit Vicky like a physical blow. Marc's head snapped toward his mother, then back to Vicky, confusion and dawning horror in his eyes. Mama, what are you talking about? Eleanor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Ask your wife, darling. Ask her about David Johnson. Ask her about revenge. Ask her about the real reason she's been playing house with our family for 3 years. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times, marking the moment when Vicky's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Some secrets, she realized, were harder to keep than others. And some mothers-in-law were far more dangerous than they appeared. The silence in Eleanor Talbot's dining room stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Vicky felt the blood drain from her face as Marc stared at her with growing horror, the pieces of her deception clicking into place in his mind. David Johnson, Marc repeated slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. The foreman who died in the Riverside Commons collapse. Johnson. His green eyes locked onto hers. Your father. It wasn't a question. The mathematical certainty of it, the timeline, her age, her maiden name, painted a picture that couldn't be denied. Vicky watched 3 years of love and trust crumble in real time across her husband's face. Marc, I can explain, she started, but Eleanor's laugh cut her off. Oh, I'm sure you can, dear. You've had 3 years to perfect your explanations. Eleanor dabbed her lips with her napkin, the picture of southern composure despite the bomb she'd just detonated. Though I must say, you've played your role beautifully. The grieving daughter seeking justice through seduction and marriage. Very dramatic. Very thorough. How long have you known? Vicky's voice came out steadier than she felt. Since before the wedding, darling. Did you really think you could infiltrate Charleston society without someone noticing? A young black woman with no family connections, no social pedigree, suddenly appearing at all the right charity events, charming all the right people. Eleanor's smile was razor-sharp. I had you investigated the moment Marc brought you home. Marc's chair scraped against the hardwood floor as he stood abruptly, his face a mask of betrayal and rage. You knew? You knew who she was and you let me marry her? I let you marry her because I knew exactly what she was planning. Eleanor's voice remained calm, controlled. And I knew that sometimes the best way to neutralize a threat is to keep it close. Vicky felt like she was drowning. You used me. Both of you used me. Used you? Eleanor laughed again, the sound like breaking crystal. My dear girl, you came into our lives with the express purpose of destroying us. You married my son under false pretenses, lived in our home, accepted our love and trust, all while planning our downfall. And you want to talk about being used? Your husband killed my father. The words exploded out of Vicky, 3 years of suppressed rage finally breaking free. He covered up safety violations, bribed inspectors, and let workers die to protect his profits. Prove it, Eleanor said simply. The challenge hung in the air between them. Vicky thought of the USB drive in her purse, the documents she'd photographed, the evidence that could bring down the Talbot empire. But looking at Eleanor's confident smile, she realized with growing dread that the older woman wasn't worried about evidence. You destroyed it, Vicky whispered. Whatever proof existed, you destroyed it. I protected my family, Eleanor corrected. Just as any mother would. Marc was pacing now, his hands running through his hair in the gesture Vicky had come to know meant he was overwhelmed. This is insane. Both of you are insane. Mama, if you knew who she was, why didn't you tell me? And Vicky. He stopped, turning to face her with eyes full of pain. How could you do this? How could you lie to me for 3 years? How could you make me fall in love with you when it was all fake? It wasn't all fake, Vicky said desperately, standing to face him. Marc, I know how this looks, but... Do you? Do you really? His voice cracked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you married me to destroy my family. It looks like every, I love you, every kiss, every moment we shared was part of some elaborate revenge plot. That's how it started, Vicky admitted, tears streaming down her face. But it's not how it ended. Marc, I love you. I didn't plan for that, I didn't want it, but it happened anyway. How convenient, Eleanor murmured. The grieving daughter falls for the son of her father's killer. How very Romeo and Juliet. Shut up, Marc snapped at his mother, then turned back to Vicky. If you really loved me, you would have told me the truth. You would have trusted me with who you really were. Would you have believed me? If I'd told you your father was a murderer, would you have listened? My father wasn't a murderer. Marc's voice echoed through the dining room. He was a good man who built this company with integrity, Anne. He was a criminal who put profits over people's lives. Vicky shot back. I have proof, Marc. Bank records, emails, documentation of every bribe, every cover-up, every... You have nothing, Eleanor interrupted smoothly. Because there's nothing to have. My husband may have made mistakes, may have trusted the wrong people, but he never deliberately put workers in danger. Then explain this. Vicky pulled out her phone, scrolling to the photos she'd taken of the documents. But as she looked at the screen, her blood turned to ice. The photos were gone. All of them. Deleted. Eleanor's smile widened. Looking for something, dear? How did you? Vicky's hands shook as she checked her cloud storage, her email, every backup location she'd used. Everything was gone. 3 years of carefully gathered evidence vanished. Did you really think I'd let you live in my son's house, use his computer, access his files, without monitoring every move you made? Eleanor's voice was almost pitying. I've been watching you, Vicky. Every document you photographed, every file you copied, every piece of so-called evidence you thought you were gathering. I've been 3 steps ahead of you the entire time. Marc sank back into his chair, his face pale. Mama, what are you saying? Are you saying there was evidence? Are you saying Dad really did? I'm saying your father did what he had to do to protect this family and this company. And I've spent the last 3 years making sure his legacy remains intact. Eleanor's mask of southern gentility finally slipped, revealing the steel underneath. Your wife came here seeking justice for her father's death. What she found instead was a family that protects its own. Vicky felt the walls closing in around her. You can't cover this up forever. There are other families, other victims. They deserve to know the truth. The truth? Eleanor stood, moving to the sideboard where family photos were displayed. She picked up one of Robert Talbot in his construction helmet, standing in front of a half-built housing development. The truth is that your father was a troublemaker who couldn't leave well enough alone. The truth is that he was threatening to expose trade secrets that would have cost hundreds of people their jobs. The truth is that sometimes one person has to be sacrificed for the greater good. He was trying to save lives. He was trying to destroy us. Eleanor's voice turned cold. And when he wouldn't listen to reason, when he wouldn't accept the generous offer we made to relocate him to another project, well, accidents happen on construction sites. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Marc's face went white as he stared at his mother. Mama, what are you saying? Are you saying Dad had David Johnson killed? I'm saying your father protected this family the only way he knew how. And I've been protecting it ever since. Eleanor moved back to the table, her movements graceful and predatory. Including protecting it from little girls who think they can waltz into our lives and tear down everything we've built. Vicky's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced down to see a message from an unknown number. Check your email. Now. A friend. With trembling fingers, she opened her email app. There, in her inbox, was a message with dozens of attachments. The documents she'd photographed. The evidence she thought had been destroyed. But these weren't her photos, these were the original files, with metadata and timestamps that proved their authenticity. Looking for these? The voice came from the dining room doorway. All 3 of them turned to see a man in his late 30s, tall and lean with the kind of quiet authority that came from years in law enforcement. Isaiah, Vicky breathed. Her brother stepped into the room, his detective's badge visible on his belt. Sorry I'm late to the party. I was busy making copies of some very interesting files that someone tried to delete from the Charleston PD evidence database. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. You have no right to be here. This is a private residence. And this is a murder investigation, Isaiah said calmly. One that's been reopened based on new evidence. Evidence that shows Robert Talbot not only covered up safety violations that led to the Riverside Commons collapse, but actively ordered the death of the foreman who tried to expose those violations. Marc stood slowly, his face a mask of horror. Murder investigation? Your father hired a crew to sabotage the building's foundation, Isaiah continued, his voice steady and professional. They were supposed to make it look like shoddy workmanship by the construction crew. But David Johnson was too good at his job. He spotted the sabotage and was planning to report it. So they made sure he was in the building when it came down. That's impossible, Marc whispered. My father wouldn't, he couldn't. He could and he did, Isaiah said. And your mother has been covering it up ever since, including monitoring and manipulating my sister's investigation. Eleanor's laugh was bitter. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've won? Even if you could prove any of this, which you can't, it won't bring your father back. It won't undo the past. All it will do is destroy innocent people. Innocent? Vicky found her voice again, rage and grief and 3 years of suppressed truth pouring out. Marc, your father didn't just kill my dad. He killed 5 other workers that day. 6 families lost everything so your family could protect their profits. Marc was staring at the family photo on the sideboard, his father's smiling face looking back at him. All this time, he said quietly. All this time I've been trying to honor his memory, trying to build something good on the foundation he laid. But it was all built on blood. Marc, darling, Eleanor started toward her son, but he stepped back. Don't. Just, don't. His voice was hollow. How long have you known? How long have you been lying to me about who my father really was? I've been protecting you. You've been protecting a lie. Marc's composure finally shattered. And you let me marry her, knowing who she was, knowing what she was going through, knowing that every day she stayed in this family was torture for her. He turned to Vicky, his eyes bright with unshed tears. And you? You could have told me. You could have trusted me with the truth. Would you have believed me? Vicky asked again, her voice breaking. Marc was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. I don't know, he admitted. But I would have wanted to. I would have tried to. Isaiah cleared his throat. I hate to interrupt this family reunion, but I have a warrant for Eleanor Talbot's arrest. Obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and accessory after the fact to murder. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, every inch the Charleston matriarch even in defeat. You have nothing that will stand up in court. We have enough, Isaiah said. Including testimony from the crew your husband hired to sabotage the building. Turns out one of them kept very detailed records. Insurance, he called it. As Isaiah moved to handcuff Eleanor, she looked at Vicky with something that might have been respect. You're stronger than I gave you credit for, dear. Your father would be proud. Don't, Vicky said quietly. Don't you dare talk about my father. Eleanor nodded once, then allowed Isaiah to lead her away. As the front door closed behind them, Vicky and Marc were left alone in the dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of their marriage and their families. So, Marc said finally, his voice barely audible. What happens now? Vicky looked at this man she'd married for revenge and stayed married to for love, this man whose world she'd just helped destroy, this man who was both victim and beneficiary of his father's crimes. I don't know, she whispered. I honestly don't know. Outside, Charleston's historic district continued its eternal dance of beauty and secrets, facades and truth. But inside the Talbot mansion, two people who'd built their love on lies finally faced each other with nothing left to hide. The question was whether love could survive when everything else had been stripped away. 3 weeks after Eleanor Talbot's arrest, Vicky sat alone in the penthouse apartment she'd rented in downtown Charleston, staring at the divorce papers spread across her coffee table. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the Arthur Ravenel Jr. Bridge stretching across the Cooper River, its cables gleaming in the late afternoon sun of early April 2025. At 34, she felt ancient. The weight of 3 years of deception, followed by 3 weeks of brutal honesty, had aged her in ways that went beyond the sleepless nights and stress-induced weight loss. The media circus surrounding Eleanor's arrest and the reopened investigation into the Riverside Commons collapse had turned her life into a fishbowl, with reporters camping outside the Talbot mansion until Marc had finally moved out. He'd been staying at his downtown office, according to Isaiah, who'd become an unwilling go-between in their fractured marriage. Her brother meant well, but every update about Marc's state of mind felt like salt in an open wound. He's not eating, Isaiah had reported yesterday. His assistant says he's working 18-hour days, throwing himself into the memorial project like his life depends on it. Maybe it did. Maybe they both needed something to focus on besides the wreckage of their relationship. Vicky's phone buzzed with a text from her therapist, Dr. Amara Collins. Remember what we discussed about forgiveness, both giving it and accepting it. Healing isn't linear. Dr. Collins had been working overtime since the truth came out, helping Vicky navigate the complex emotions of grief, rage, love, and guilt that threatened to drown her daily. The hardest part wasn't the anger, she'd been carrying that for 6 years. The hardest part was the love that refused to die, even now. A knock at her door made her jump. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the building's security was supposed to keep reporters out. Through the peephole, she saw a familiar figure that made her heart stutter. Marc stood in the hallway, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his green eyes. But it was the expression on his face that made her open the door, raw vulnerability mixed with desperate hope. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi." She stepped back to let him in, hyper-aware of her own appearance. She'd been living in yoga pants and oversized sweaters, her natural hair pulled back in a messy bun, makeup abandoned weeks ago. Marc looked around the sparse apartment. She'd only taken the essentials when she'd moved out of their home. "This is nice. Good view." "Marc." She closed the door and leaned against it. "What are you doing here?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the bridge. "I've been thinking. About us. About everything that happened. About what comes next." "The divorce papers are on the table," she said, hating how her voice cracked. "I haven't signed them yet, but I don't want a divorce." The words hung between them like a lifeline thrown across an impossible chasm. Vicky felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. "Marc, we can't just pretend." "I'm not pretending anything." He turned to face her, and she saw tears in his eyes. "I know what you did. I know why you did it. I know that our entire relationship started as a lie. But Vicky, I also know that somewhere along the way, it became real. For both of us. How can you be sure? How can you trust anything I've told you? Marc moved closer, close enough that she could smell his familiar cologne, see the pain etched in every line of his face. Because I know you. I've lived with you for 3 years. I've watched you cry at sad movies, seen you stay up all night taking care of me when I had the flu, felt you shake with nightmares you wouldn't talk about. I've seen you with my mother. His voice broke. God, Vicky, you loved her. Even knowing what she'd done, what she was hiding, you loved her. That wasn't fake. Vicky's vision blurred with tears. She was like the mother I never had. After my mom died when I was 16, I thought I'd never have that kind of relationship again. And then Eleanor. She laughed bitterly. The irony is perfect, isn't it? I fell in love with the family I was supposed to destroy. Including me? The question was barely a whisper, but it hit her like a shout. Especially you. Marc reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing her cheek. Then why are we giving up? Why are we letting my father's crimes and my mother's lies destroy what we built together? Because what we built was based on deception. No. His voice was firm. What we built was based on love. Yes, it started with deception. Yes, we both made mistakes. But Vicky, the woman I fell in love with, the woman who challenges me, who makes me laugh, who sees the best in people even when they don't deserve it, that woman is real. She's standing right here. Vicky closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 3 years of lies and 3 weeks of truth pressing down on her. I don't know how to move forward from this. I don't know how to trust myself, let alone ask you to trust me. Then let's figure it out together. She opened her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that took her breath away. Marc, the media attention, the investigation, the trial, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Your family name is going to be dragged through every newspaper in the South. Are you really willing to go through that with me? The woman who exposed your family's crimes. You didn't expose them, Marc said quietly. You revealed them. There's a difference. And yes, I'm willing to go through anything if it means we have a chance to build something real together. Something honest. What about the company? Your father's legacy? Marc's expression hardened. My father's legacy is 6 dead workers and decades of cover-ups. I'm not interested in preserving that. I'm interested in building something new. Something that honors the people he hurt instead of the profits he protected. The memorial project? It's just the beginning. I want to turn Talbot construction into something that actually serves the community. Affordable housing, community centers, projects that give back instead of just taking. He paused. I want to do it with you. If you'll have me. Vicky stared at him, this man who'd had his entire world turned upside down and was somehow still standing, still fighting, still believing in the possibility of redemption. Marc, I married you to destroy you. How can you forgive that? Because I understand why you did it. Because if someone had killed my father and covered it up, I might have done the same thing. His voice grew soft. And because somewhere in the middle of your revenge plot, you saved me instead. Saved you. From becoming him. From blindly following in his footsteps without questioning the cost. From building my life on a foundation of lies. Marc took her hands in his. Vicky, you gave me the chance to choose who I want to be. That's not destruction, that's salvation. The tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally broke free. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for lying to you, for manipulating you, for making you fall in love with someone who wasn't real. You are real, Marc interrupted, pulling her into his arms. The woman who stayed up with me when I had food poisoning from that sketchy seafood place. The woman who learned to make my grandmother's biscuit recipe because she knew it would make me happy. The woman who cried when we watched our wedding video last Christmas, that woman is real. That woman is who I fell in love with. Vicky buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent that had become home to her. I love you, she whispered. I didn't want to, I tried not to, but I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too. All of you. The parts that are light and the parts that are dark. The parts that are healing and the parts that are still broken. Marc pulled back to look at her. But Vicky, if we're going to do this, if we're going to try to build something real, we have to promise each other complete honesty from now on. No more secrets, no more lies, no matter how much the truth might hurt. Can you handle that? Can you handle knowing that every day for 3 years, I woke up planning your family's destruction? Can you handle knowing that part of me is relieved? That part of me is grateful you exposed the truth about my father, even though it destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family. They stared at each other, 2 people who'd been broken by the same tragedy, who'd found each other across an impossible divide, who'd built love on a foundation of lies and were now trying to rebuild it on truth. We're going to need help, Vicky said finally. Therapy. Lots of therapy. Marc smiled for the first time in weeks. Dr. Collins comes highly recommended. You've been talking to Dr. Collins? I've been talking to everyone who might help me understand how to fix this. Your brother, my assistant, even some of the other victims' families. Marc's expression grew serious. They don't all forgive me for my father's crimes. Some of them never will. But a few of them think what we're trying to build together might be worth something. What are we trying to build? A marriage based on truth instead of lies. A company that serves justice instead of profit. A legacy that honors the dead instead of burying them. Marc cupped her face in his hands. A love story that proves redemption is possible, even when everything seems broken beyond repair. Vicky looked into his eyes and saw her own hope reflected back at her. It wouldn't be easy. The trial would be brutal, the media attention relentless, the process of rebuilding trust slow and painful. But for the first time in weeks, she could imagine a future that didn't involve running away from the wreckage of her choices. Okay, she whispered. Okay, let's try. Let's see if we can build something real out of all this mess. Marc's smile was radiant. Does this mean you're not signing the divorce papers? This means I'm tearing up the divorce papers. Vicky moved to the coffee table and gathered the documents, ripping them in half with a satisfying tear. But Marc, I need you to understand, I'm not the same woman you married. The past 3 weeks have changed me. The guilt, the grief, the relief of finally telling the truth, I'm different now. So am I, Marc said. I'm not the naive idealist who thought his family was perfect. I'm not the man who could ignore uncomfortable truths because they didn't fit my worldview. We're both different. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's exactly what we need. As the sun set over Charleston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Vicky and Marc sat together on her couch, talking through the hard questions they'd been avoiding for weeks. How to handle the media attention. How to support each other through the trial. How to rebuild their marriage on a foundation of honesty instead of deception. It wouldn't be easy. Love built on lies was complicated enough, love rebuilt on truth was even harder. But as Marc's hand found hers in the growing darkness, Vicky felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the desperate hope of revenge finally achieved, but the quiet hope of two broken people choosing to heal together. Some love stories began with deception. The best ones learned how to survive the truth. 6 months later, on a crisp October morning in 2025, Vicky stood before the mirror in their rebuilt master bedroom, fastening the same pearl necklace Marc had given her for their second anniversary. But everything else had changed. The woman looking back at her was different, older, wiser, marked by months of therapy, legal proceedings, and the slow, painful work of rebuilding a marriage from the ground up. At 34, she finally looked like herself. Her natural hair fell in soft curls around her shoulders, her makeup was minimal, and the dress she wore was one she'd chosen for herself, not for the image of the perfect Charleston socialite she'd once performed. Today was the dedication ceremony for the Riverside Commons Memorial Garden, and for the first time in 7 years, she would stand on the ground where her father had died, not as a grieving daughter seeking revenge, but as a woman who'd found peace. You ready for this? Marc asked from the doorway. At 36, he too had been transformed by the past months. The naive idealism had been replaced by hard-won wisdom, the easy charm tempered by genuine humility. He'd lost weight during Eleanor's trial, but had gained something more valuable: the respect of the families his father had wronged, earned through months of patient listening, genuine apologies, and concrete action. As ready as I'll ever be, Vicky replied, turning to face her husband. The word still felt new on her tongue, even after 3.5 years of marriage. They'd renewed their vows 2 months ago in a small ceremony at St. Philip's Church, the same church where they'd first married, but this time with complete honesty between them. Marc crossed the room and took her hands, a gesture that had become their ritual before facing difficult moments together. Dr. Collins says it's normal to feel anxious about today. Dr. Collins says a lot of things, Vicky said with a small smile. Their couple's therapist had become a fixture in their lives, guiding them through the minefield of rebuilding trust while processing trauma. But she's usually right. The past 6 months had been the hardest of Vicky's life, and that was saying something. Eleanor's trial had dominated Charleston headlines for weeks, with every sordid detail of the Talbot family's crimes splashed across newspapers and social media. The revelation that Robert Talbot had ordered the murder of 6 construction workers to cover up safety violations had sent shockwaves through Charleston's elite society. But it was the personal cost that had nearly broken them both. Watching Marc testify against his own mother, seeing him struggle with the destruction of everything he'd believed about his family, had been agonizing. There were nights when Vicky had found him sitting in their garden at 3 a.m., staring at nothing, processing the weight of inherited guilt. I keep thinking about all the times she tucked me in as a child, he'd said one particularly difficult night. All the bedtime stories, the birthday parties, the way she'd bandage my scraped knees. How do you reconcile that with someone who covered up murder for 30 years? You don't, Dr. Collins had told them during one of their sessions. You learn to hold both truths at the same time. People are complex. Eleanor Talbot was capable of genuine love for her family and genuine evil toward others. Both things can be true. Eleanor had been sentenced to 15 years in prison for obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and accessory after the fact to murder. She'd maintained her innocence to the end, insisting she'd only been protecting her family. She'd refused to see Marc since the sentencing, a final act of manipulation disguised as martyrdom. She wants you to feel guilty for choosing justice over family loyalty, Dr. Collins had explained. Don't give her that power. Easier said than done. But slowly, painfully, Marc had begun to separate his love for the mother who'd raised him from his condemnation of the woman who'd covered up murder. It was a process that would probably take years, but he was making progress. As was Vicky. Learning to trust Marc again, and more importantly, learning to trust herself, had been its own journey. The guilt over her deception had nearly consumed her in the early months. How could she judge Eleanor for lying when she'd built her entire marriage on lies? Because your lies were born from grief and a desire for justice, Dr. Collins had reminded her. Eleanor's lies were born from greed and a desire to protect wealth. Intent matters. Does it? Marc still got hurt. I still manipulated someone I loved. Yes, you did. And you've taken responsibility for that. You've apologized, you've been honest about your motivations, and you've committed to rebuilding your relationship on truth. That's what redemption looks like, not perfection, but the willingness to do better. Now, as they prepared to leave for the memorial dedication, Vicky felt the weight of that redemption. Not as a burden, but as a gift. She and Marc had chosen the hard path, staying together, working through their issues, building something new from the ashes of their deception. It would have been easier to divorce, to start over with clean slates and different people. But they'd chosen each other, scars and all. The drive to the memorial site took them through downtown Charleston, past the courthouse where Eleanor had been sentenced, past the newspaper offices that had covered their story, past the society venues where Vicky had once performed the role of the perfect wife. The city looked the same, but she saw it differently now, not as a stage for her deception, but as home. There's something I need to tell you before we get there, Marc said as they turned onto the street where the memorial garden had been built. Vicky's stomach clenched. Even now, after months of radical honesty, unexpected revelations still triggered her anxiety. What is it? Isaiah called this morning. The families of the other victims, they want to thank you. Personally. For having the courage to expose the truth. Tears pricked Vicky's eyes. She'd been so focused on her own grief and guilt that she'd sometimes forgotten there were other families who'd been waiting 7 years for justice. I don't deserve their thanks. I didn't do it for them. I did it for revenge. You did it for your father. And in doing that, you gave their fathers, their brothers, their sons the justice they deserved too. Marc pulled into the parking area near the memorial site. Intent matters, but so do results. You saved other families from going through what you went through. The memorial garden was beautiful in a way that took Vicky's breath away. Where the collapsed Riverside Commons building had once stood, there was now a peaceful space filled with native plants, walking paths, and 6 granite benches, one for each worker who died. In the center stood a fountain surrounded by plaques bearing the names of the victims, including her father's, David Michael Johnson, 1965 to 2019, beloved father and advocate for worker safety. It's perfect, Vicky whispered, her hand finding Marc's. It's what they deserved. What your father deserved. The dedication ceremony was small but meaningful. Mayor Williams spoke about the importance of worker safety and corporate accountability. Isaiah, representing the families, talked about the long journey to justice. And Marc, as the head of the newly restructured Talbot Construction and Community Development, made a speech that brought tears to every eye present. My father built an empire on the backs of working people, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. He prioritized profits over people, and 6 good men died because of his choices. I can't undo that. I can't bring back David Johnson, Michael Torres, James Washington, Robert Chen, Anthony Martinez, or William Brooks. But I can promise that their deaths will not be in vain. He gestured to the memorial garden around them. This space will serve as a reminder that every worker deserves to go home safely to their families. That no profit margin is worth a human life. That corporate accountability isn't just a buzzword, it's a moral imperative. Marc's voice grew stronger. Talbot Construction and Community Development is committed to being part of the solution. We're implementing the strictest safety protocols in the industry. We're partnering with worker advocacy groups. And we're dedicating 50% of our profits to building affordable housing and community centers in underserved neighborhoods. He looked directly at Vicky. Most importantly, we're committed to truth, to transparency, to never again allowing corporate interests to override human dignity. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, Vicky found herself standing alone at her father's memorial bench. The plaque read, "David Johnson believed that every worker deserved to come home safe. His courage in speaking truth to power cost him his life, but his legacy lives on in every life saved by his example." "I did it, Daddy," she whispered, touching the cool granite. "I got justice for you. For all of you. It took longer than I planned, and it cost more than I expected, but I did it. He'd be proud of you." Vicky turned to find an elderly black woman approaching, someone she didn't recognize but who looked familiar somehow. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" The woman smiled. "I'm Dorothy Torres, Michael's mother." She gestured to another memorial bench. "My son died in that building too." Vicky's breath caught. "Mrs. Torres, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry it took so long to get justice for Michael." "Child, don't you apologize for anything. You did what none of us could do. You got inside their world, you found the truth, and you had the courage to expose it." Dorothy took Vicky's hands in hers. "My Michael would have liked your daddy. They were both the kind of men who stood up for what was right, no matter the cost." "Thank you," Vicky managed through her tears. "No, thank you. For not giving up. For fighting for all our children, not just your own daddy." As Dorothy walked away to join her own family, Vicky felt a hand on her shoulder. Marc stood beside her, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "You okay?" "I think so. For the first time in 7 years, I think I'm actually okay." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun filter through the oak trees that had been planted around the memorial. Spanish moss swayed gently in the October breeze, and somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour. "So what happens now?" Vicky asked. "Now we go home. We have dinner. We watch terrible reality TV and argue about whether to get a dog." Marc's smile was soft. "We live our lives. Together. Honestly. That sounds perfect. Even the part about the dog? Because I've been looking at rescue websites, and there's this golden retriever mix." Vicky laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Even the part about the dog." As they walked back to their car, hand in hand, Vicky caught sight of their reflection in the memorial fountain. Two people who'd been broken by tragedy, who'd found each other across an impossible divide, who'd built love on lies and then rebuilt it on truth. They looked older, wiser, marked by their journey but not defeated by it. "Marc? Yeah? I love you. The real you. The man who chose justice over family loyalty, who turned his father's empire into something good, who forgave me for the unforgivable. I love you too. The real you. The woman who fought for justice even when it cost her everything, who had the courage to tell the truth even when it would have been easier to keep lying, who chose to rebuild instead of running away." They drove home through Charleston's historic streets as the sun set over the harbor, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The city's beauty remained, but its secrets had been exposed, its wounds beginning to heal. Some love stories began with deception and ended with truth. The best ones proved that redemption was possible, even when everything seemed broken beyond repair. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, love could survive anything, even the truth. 1 year later. Vicky Johnson Talbot stood in the nursery of their Charleston home, her hand resting on her growing belly as she watched Marc assemble a crib with the intense concentration of a man determined to get every screw perfect. "You know we have 6 months before the baby arrives," she said, amused. "I want everything to be ready," Marc replied, not looking up from the instruction manual. "I want our child to come into a world where everything is honest and safe and good." Vicky smiled, thinking of the memorial garden where they'd scattered her father's ashes last month, of the community center that would break ground next spring, of the love they'd built from the ashes of deception. "I think," she said softly, "our child is going to be very lucky indeed." Outside their window, Charleston Harbor sparkled in the afternoon sun, and somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour. The city of secrets had become a city of truth, and two people who'd found each other across an impossible divide were building a future worthy of the love they'd fought so hard to save. Some stories ended with justice. The best ones began there. Vicky married for revenge but found redemption. Marc inherited guilt but chose justice. Together, they proved that love built on truth is stronger than love built on lies. What would you have done in Vicky's place? Could you forgive the son of your father's killer? Comment below. Did Vicky make the right choice? Could you rebuild love after that betrayal? Team justice or team forgiveness? Subscribe for stories that prove love conquers all. Hit the bell for weekly uploads. Like if this story touched your heart. Share with someone who believes in second chances. Because some secrets destroy families, and others set them free.